Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ninth masterclass of the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions Masterclass series. I'm Shaura Mal, and I support the Secretariat for the forum. Today's session is titled Data-Driven Urban Greening, Insights from the 330-300 Framework Assessment. Before we begin, a quick introduction to the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions. The forum is a coalition of research, practice, and finance organizations working together to scale up the adoption of NbS to shape climate-resilient cities and communities across India. Through knowledge exchanges like this masterclass series, we aim to share actionable strategies and insights that support practitioners, policymakers, researchers in implementing NbS on the ground. For today's masterclass, we will be diving into data-driven urban greening. As Indian cities expand rapidly, the urgency to ensure green, healthy, and climate-resilient urban environments continues to grow. Urban green spaces like parks, tree-lined streets, green roofs, and community gardens play a critical role in mitigating heat, improving air quality, supporting biodiversity, and promoting public health. Yet their distribution and accessibility often remain unequal, raising important concerns about spatial equity and urban resilience. This session explores how urban greening can be framed and implemented as a nature-based solution and how data, especially spatial data, can guide more equitable and strategic green infrastructure planning. At the heart of today's discussion is the 330-300 benchmark and an internationally recognized framework that sets clear targets to ensure green space visibility, canopy cover, and access. We'll hear findings from its application in Nagpur, offering valuable insights for urban areas across the country. We're delighted to have two speakers with us today who have worked on this assessment directly. Dr. Shalini Dhyani is a principal scientist at CSIR NEERI, India. Dr. Dhyani is a leading voice in ecosystem-based approaches to urban resilience. She is a visiting scientist at the Center for International Forestry Research, Bogor, Indonesia. She is the Asia Vice Chair and a Steering Committee member in the Commission on Ecosystems Management of IUCN and an associate of UNESCO, the World Academy of Sciences. Shalini works on socio-ecological interlinkages, following diverse knowledge systems and sustainability science approaches for ecosystem conservation and implementing ecosystem-based approaches. Welcome, Dr. Shalini. Our next speaker, Shruti Lahoti, is a policy researcher at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, Japan. Shruti is an interdisciplinary researcher with expertise in urban ecosystems, green space planning, and sustainable development. She joined IGES in 2020 after nearly a decade at the United Nations University in Tokyo. At IGES, she also leads the editorial operations of the journal Sustainability Science. Her research focuses on advancing urban sustainability through NbS, with particular attention to cultural ecosystem services, human-nature connections, and the equitable distribution of urban green spaces. Welcome to both of our speakers today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We will take audience questions after the presentation, so please share your questions in the Q&A section as the session progresses. This session is being recorded and will be made available for future reference on YouTube and will be shared to your registered email addresses. With that, now let's move on to the presentation segment and now invite Dr. Shalini to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaurya, and a very warm welcome to all of you again. Sharing my presentation and just let me know if it is visible to everybody.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Yeah. Thank you once again, Shaurya, and for this NbS masterclass. I think we all have less time for the presentation, so I'll not go in detail, but I'm really glad to be part of this NbS forum in India. And I think this very much requires the kind of work researchers are doing across the country. And I think the way Indian cities are expanding and sprawling, it's very, very important that we talk about data-driven urban greening, because in silos, we are doing a lot of work. Practitioners are implementing solutions, researchers are doing work. But at the same time, we need to understand there is still a huge green divide in our urban areas. There are huge inequalities, demand and supply gap of urban green spaces, and that also affects the quality of life of urban citizens. So what could be the kind of data that we require to improve our city planning and also develop future resilient cities? This is what I'm going to talk about. I think when I talk about urbanization to all the audience, this is not a very new thing, and we all are knowing that uh, our planet is growing at a very faster rate of urbanization, and it's already projected that in coming years we'll be one of the most urbanized country region, and largely the entire planet will be highly urbanized. At the same time, we know that UN Sustainable Development Goal 11 is talking about inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable growth. So that means protecting the natural cultural heritage of the cities, reducing per capita environmental impact, and also improving the access of urban green spaces by 2030. Now, this is quite a challenge with the kind of cities are developing, be it in Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 cities across the country. And at the same time, the changing climate conditions. We know right now the May has been very vulnerable in the country. At the same time, many other parts of the region. And there is a huge risk that our cities are going to be the center of disaster risk now than it was earlier. So it's a huge concern that nature is not only seen as something that is aesthetic and beautiful and the source of biodiversity, but also seen as a resource that can help us reduce disaster risk and also adapt to the climate change in the future. Now, when I talk about urbanization, I think it's very, very important for all of us to understand that urbanization has been a challenge. Whatever I discussed and whatever we are facing, urbanization is definitely a challenge for the humanity. But at the same time, if we see, it's also a great opportunity to manage ecosystem services, and ensure there is an equitable sharing of benefits among all. So we know that there are multiple studies that have come up in last 3 to 4 years where urban campuses are one of the most important biodiversity hotspots. We also know that a lot of these charismatic biodiversity is thriving in our urban areas. And at the same time, these urban green spaces are a huge source of a lot of aesthetic, a lot of cultural benefits that communities, citizens very much require to ensure that human health is good. And at the same time, we get the kind of benefits we are expecting from these green spaces. Now, as I mentioned, urban green spaces have been considered as the last refuge to biodiversity. It's a very much rarity to find some of these natural hotspots in the heart of the city. But at the same time, we have seen some of these thriving, beautiful urban green spaces across the cities in different parts of the country. And these are not just green spaces, these are home to a lot of biodiversity. And when we started seeing the microhabitat in public as well as motorable roads, the trees that are there, we found there is n number of beautiful biodiversity elements that these trees are holding. So it's just not trees, but a whole lot of supporting services in terms of habitat that these trees are providing. At the same time, these are again a very important source of carbon stocks that is actually very much important for strategic reasons for the country. Now, it's very important when we talk about green spaces, we also talk about nature-based solutions because blue-green infrastructure is one of the subcategory of nature-based solution, and it has a huge potential not only to localize all these important targets of SDGs or climate or restoration or biodiversity, but at the same time, it also provides a lot of benefits and co-benefits that are necessary for local and individual household. When we started working on these urban issues in last almost a decade or so, we found that our solutions have to be very, very ward specific. We always think at city level, but it's very important because all these ward at landscape level also are facing their own challenges because of the topography, because of the greenery, because of the kind of development and infrastructure development that they have seen. So it's very important that we look at a very, very local lens, at a very local stage, where diverse stakeholders can understand what exactly is going in their local regions, to understand the concerns, to understand the drivers, and accordingly design nature-based solutions. Now, but this is what I've been discussing about India. But if we talk about global concerns, how actually cities across the world have been monitoring nature in the city. Now, there was a very important study by Jennifer, who is one of the colleagues in IUCN Commission on Ecosystems Management, and he took almost 24 cities across the world, right, in Europe to Africa to Asia to Latin America and North America, and she found that These are the actually important frameworks that are used to monitor nature in urban areas. So these are SDGs, nationally determined standards, Singapore Index of Biodiversity. We have been knowing a lot about that. HE targets of biodiversity, biophilic cities, UN Habitats Indicator, ISO standards are already there. And also they have been looking to IUCN Global Standard of Nature-Based Solution, because this is a very criteria and indicator based approach that can really help to understand how best blue-green infrastructure is implemented in the urban area. So there are a whole lot of features of nature that are monitored, right from water quality, waste generation, carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. But most of these efforts have been local, but at what level of local is something that is really needs to be thought about. How, when we talk about local, if that much of baseline data is available, is another food for thought for all of us to understand when we see this important slide. Now, one thing has been very clear, that a very rigorous approach of sampling and a long-term approach, like how we do long-term ecological research or how we do critical zone research, where there is a multidisciplinary approach to address the issues in ecological system. This is the same approach that we have to ensure having included in data collection for urban areas as well, where there are researchers involved, where there are different diverse stakeholders involved, urban planners involved, and not to miss citizen scientists. Some of the bird data, some of the phenological data that is emerging from urban area is very, very critical, but at same time very important, that is very nicely also integrated in urban planning. Now, this is something that is largely missing in our context. So when I talk about Nagpur, there are two important things. NEERI, our organization, has been bringing environmental status report for last almost 10 years for Nagpur. So every year, these are the different parameters or aspects: air pollution, water, wastewater, solid and hazard waste, climate change. And we also study the damage cost assessment for certain aspects that city is having. But the beauty of this report has been every year we try to bring in new aspect of research that can help Nagpur Municipal Corporation to understand how better planning can actually improve the demand supply and address the demand supply gap of green spaces in the city. Now, while we are doing this at scientific level with the NMC, the Nagpur Municipal Corporation, Nagpur Municipal Corporation themselves are bringing up the second level of census. And now, as you see how government data is generated, a lot of these statistics are provided. While we see the city is having a decline in green spaces, the statistics shows that we are actually facing an increase in green spaces. Now, there is a kind of disparity that these two reports are bringing, but it's important to understand where the gaps are and where these silos can be filled by both researchers and planners coming together. Now, this is something for last more than 5 to 6 years we are trying to work in. While nature-based solutions have been a very Western terminology, we are trying to understand how Indian and developing countries, especially, and developing regions can have been doing all these nature-based solutions from a very, very local scale. And then, of course, there are the opportunities of integrating blue-green infrastructure across different Asian countries. We're also trying to understand how to develop a kind of connect between people with their neighborhood greens by improving or understanding the kind of urban foraging aspect that have been developing a kind of nature connectedness approach in urban areas. So these are some of the important work that we have done in the last few years. But at the same time, as you know, NbS, IUCN, nature-based solution, global standards have been very, very important in last 4 to 5 years. We this year also brought in these 8 or 9 translations in different Indian languages and also some of the Asian languages like Malay, Nepali, and Persian. So now this is some of the work that has really helped us, and I should thank WRI in their one of the workshops that I attended in Kerala, where there was a huge demand of local understanding and local language translations for NBS. This is what actually helped us to go further and bring all these translations for local stakeholders. Now, there are different methodologies. Shruti will be talking about 330, 300, how remote sensing, participatory surveys, and also field-based observations have played a huge role. Then, of course, demand supply gap, more with participatory surveys and also understanding the remote sensing tools in this application. City biodiversity index is very crucial, but at the same time, there are a lot more things to be understood when we do city biodiversity index. So a lot of systematic research review, remote sensing, field-based, and these are all different methodologies that we have been using in last almost a decade. Now, the important aspect in last all these 10 years were that while we were studying urban areas, we also tried to bring up some of the important indexes. Like one of the index was a score-based matrix that is called as total importance value that can help you what kind of trees we need to have in urban areas. Is this just native or debate between native or invasive species? Or if there is something more that we need to talk about, species that gave us medicinal benefit, aesthetic benefit, edibles, provisioning benefits, supporting, regulating, and all those. So this is one of the initial indexes that we developed in 2020. And now we are improvising this index by including more supporting, regulating, and cultural ecosystem benefits to have a more approach that is more usable, replicable, and that can also be used by even laymen who is working in urban planning and all. So, I mean, the people who are involved with as contractors with Nagpur Municipal Corporation or any other municipal corporation for implementation. So we have been doing a lot of capacity building and ensuring that we are just not limited to Nagpur. Our data information is also relevant for different cities across the country. So these are some of the publications. Apart from what scientific publication we do, we also try to bring the relevance of urban areas that's just not limited to trees and the species, but also a lot more lower level of plants, fungi, and also butterflies and so on and so forth. Now, Shruti will be talking about this slide, but I think there is a huge disparity for every city. It's just not Nagpur. If you see the kind of public green spaces and their distribution across the cities is also very varied. So certain regions, because of the density and the concretization and the lack of availability of spaces, they have less green spaces where there are many other areas that are more green, there are more campuses, and that's why they get a lot of benefit from these green spaces. Now, WHO already recommend that at least 9 meters square per capita of green space should be available to each individual of the city. And as per urban guidelines by Government of India, 10 to 12 meters square per capita green space should be accessible to every individual in the city. But if you see this, there is a huge disparity. And this disparity, when we started talking to people and we questioned almost 1,500 people in Nagpur during COVID, and we asked them to tag their city if they think their city is their ward is a green ward, or their ward is a red ward, or their ward is an orange ward in terms of greenery, where green stands for they're satisfied for green spaces and red stands for they don't have actually green spaces. So they have to actually travel a lot of, I mean, they have to travel long distances in other ward to access those green spaces. And we were surprised there was a huge divide where 50% of city thinks that their city has green wards, green spaces that are sufficient, but another 50% who are thinking their city is fast losing these green spaces, and there is a huge concern where policymakers, urban planners need to think how these green spaces can be secured and restored back. And at the same time, they also think they are not very much satisfied how the green spaces are taken care of, being cared of. And also they are not satisfied with the green spaces, and they think that their green spaces are not sufficient to adapt to and withstand the kind of air pollution or urban heat islands that are emerging in their city. And similarly, we did some of the work on 14 urban lakes in the city. And if you see, the future of lake very much depends on the kind of buffers they have. So if these buffers are degrading over the time period, by understanding the blue-green ratio, we could project how these city lakes are going to be. So the loss of green spaces also means further wastewater entering these areas or concretization that you can see in these lakes, in these GIS imageries. So this is how can be one of the approach how better data can be generated by using remote sensing and other approaches. City biodiversity index we have done for Faridabad and Nagpur, and if you see the entire country right now, many cities have been following city biodiversity index, and a lot of even state biodiversity agencies are following and focusing on this. But at the same time, I should highlight here one of the important aspects that is having baseline data. We don't have still baseline data for native biodiversity. So if you want to compare, how do you are going to compare what natural areas in the city. So there has to be some baseline, and unfortunately, we are lacking that baseline for most of the cities. The studies are mostly done by secondary data review. Lack of primary data is something that I would like to highlight. But at the same time, governance and management is also the area among the indicators where you don't get sufficient information from municipal corporation, how much of the budget is allocated, where and how much programs and activities of outreach are happening. You can never get the clear and accurate number. So these are some of the aspects that are very relevant for all the cities who are doing city biodiversity to have understanding on baseline and how to improve these concerns. Now, there is this another urban nature index. This is next level of city biodiversity index. And apart from biodiversity, they have included light exposure and human pressure. So that can be relevant. And I'm sure in future, you will see some of this work from IUCN being done in urban areas in India. And there is the Urban Biodiversity Suitability Index, another important index that talks about different soundscape layers, human accessibility layer, artifact volumetry layers, and land cover analysis to come up with Urban Biodiversity Suitability Index. Now, there is, if you see, a whole lot of things happening in the sphere of urban green spaces, different kind of indexes are there. But there is this new index 330-300 during COVID. Cecil from University of British Columbia launched it. He discovered it. And I think this is one of the very meaningful approach that even a layman can go and understand how green is your neighborhood and how your cities are performing. Shruti will be talking about this, but I should thank my researchers in Nagpur in Niri who really helped me go across the city, talk to people, and also help with analyzing crown by crown how we can improve and understand 330-300 index for the city. So some of my concluding remarks from my presentation are that actually India requires and desperately requires standard-driven urban green spaces planning. But we need to understand what will be our standard and benchmark. Are we going to follow the everything at everywhere kind of approach or some kind of uniformity that each and every city should do so that there is a uniformity in urban green space planning across the city? Then the second important aspect is we still don't have a multidisciplinary and participatory mode of collection of data. Now, this is something that we have learned throughout the cycle. We have collaborated with multiple researchers and also involvement of citizens and diverse stakeholders. So this has to be improved. And this is where academicians, researchers can play a big role by connecting with municipal corporation. The focus of data-driven greening has to be understanding the disparity and marginalization and how the excess of urban poor is in these cities to address green justice and equitable sharing of benefit concerns. While we know that in the country, still co-planning, co-designing is largely missing in urban green space planning as well, but it is very important that if we want to have future resilient cities in place where data demand supply gaps are addressed, it is very important that we sit together, come out of our silos and go with this approach. At the same time, government funding will not be sufficient to implement all these good understanding data-driven approaches. There has to be a lot of big data that is generated. And for understanding that data and implementing better policies and approaches, private sector funding is required. And engaging poor and marginalized people in these approaches, I think incentives becomes very important because that can help them with income diversification and more sustainable approach of greening our cities. I thank you all again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini, for that presentation. A lot of food for thought for our audience. Over to Shruti to walk us through the 330-300 framework assessment.
Hello, can you see my screen? Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Shalini ma'am, for introducing me to this platform, and thank you, Shara, for the introduction. I'm really honored to be part of this masterclass under India Forum for Nature-Based Solution. In this webinar, I'll be presenting an evidence-based rule, which Shalini ma'am just introduced, 330-300. And this rule we recently applied and found it to be very simple in application and can easily replicate it to know our cities in terms of urban green space provisions. So, but before we get into the numbers, why we need to look at cities differently is a question. Cities are transitioning and it's transforming at a very fast pace, and we are witnessing it, especially India. And I strongly believe that this transformation transition must be towards climate resilience, urban dwellers' well being, and equity and special justice led by Greens. This is especially relevant in Indian context as the transition and the pace at which the transformation happening is unprecedented. Between now and 2050, urban dwellers will increase immensely, and urbanization is not just about grey infrastructure. It's about ecosystem, public health, spatial access and equity, and several other things which Shalini ma'am just explained. And also we need to make our cities livable. So this, the city now, which is evolving at a very fast pace, we don't want it to grow as a grey giant. So interventions and explorations are required. And the question is, how do we do that? So the first step is by asking a fundamental question and understanding what we have. And that is why mapping our greens accurately is important, and it is an imperative part of planning activity. Because in absence of data, green infrastructure often flows where it is easiest to build and not where is needed most. And that is why today's discussion and the rule 330-300 is very, very important. It gives us a very structured and evidence based way to see and ask, where is the green, who sees it, who can reach it, and who is left out. And so this is the base of my presentation. And moving on to slide 2, I'm not saying that transition or transformation is not happening. Shalini ma'am already explained so many things that a global platform is happening: policy, innovation, research framework, multi-institutional coalition, all are actively shaping it. And this slide and other policies signals that momentum which is happening. They show us that urban greening is not now seen as essential and not optional. But the real question is, are these efforts enough? Especially in case of India, are we measuring and mapping the greens in the way that are quick, replicable, and equity sensitive enough to match the pace at which we are seeing the transition and the pressure of urban growth, as well as the demands of different infrastructure requirements in the city? And so today I'll talk about this. So this is the slide which gives a quick roadmap of the session. I'll begin with essential questions of the W's of greens. So what, where, and why it matters. Then a brief overview of the metrics followed to capture urban green spaces, and introduction of the rule 330-300 and the case study which we did in Nagpur, and then how we applied this rule and what it revealed, and some wrap up which could help us or guide us ahead in our journey to capture urban green space provisions. So to begin with is, what is urban green spaces? They are incredibly diverse in form, function, ownership, and accessibility. They range from large city parks to narrow roadside maidens, railway buffers, even the greens which are linked or connected to temples, schools, government campuses. Some are plant, manicured, and some of them emerge informally along the drains, canals, vacant lots. But each of these spaces, regardless of size, origin, or even access, play an important role in overall urban ecosystems. But what is important is when we see these satellite images or development plan or master plan, the marked greens, which we actually see and shows the ground reality, in ground it is completely different. The space might be fenced off, not accessible, it might be unmanaged, littered, and sometimes perceived as unsafe to go or to actually use it, or it might be simply due to far to walk, especially for children, women, and elderly. And that's why we come and talk about spatial equity and all those aspects. So next is, who shaped this urban green space is the question. And this isn't a job of single agency. It's a complex process and have layers of institutions. In most Indian cities, municipal garden department or municipal corporation, local bodies take the lead. These are also supported by smart city cells or horticulture cells. But these teams are often understaffed, and this is my experience: understaffed, under-resourced, and under-equipped with spatial data, digital tools. In parallel, State Forest Department also handle green assets, which are of importance and ecological concerns, especially urban forest or some forest areas in the peri-urban zones. Some private firms are also involved in maintaining parks and roadside green and public landscape. But what we see in this overall process is that a fragmented governance structure where roles overlap, mandates are unclear, and green spaces are often fall between institutional cracks and seen as not essential. And green infrastructure actually is just piece of a larger city puzzle. It sits alongside transport planning, housing demand, sanitation, drainage, all competing for land, funding, attention. And in that competition, green and urban environment is often the first to be compromised and the last to be defended. What Shalini ma'am just mentioned, nature-based solution may bring a paradigm shift towards looking at this or the greens in an integrated manner and linking this to probably public health, climate resilience, stormwater management, and so on. And it may help change perspective to see greens as a core infrastructure. But in that, if we do that, we need to be treat greens, govern green, and resource green in that manner as well. So probably that is what is needed at this stage. So now the next slide, why green matters. So it brings together insights from multiple disciplines, not just environment, public health, urban sociology, to explain why it matters environmentally. We all know, and ma'am also explained, and even Shaurya introduced that greens help us breathe and adapt. It helps reduce heat island effect, absorb stormwater, carbon storage, and so on. On public health front also, it helps reduce anxiety. It allows physical movement, improve respiratory and cardiovascular health diseases. This is the most important aspect which we all have experienced during COVID-19. Many of us experience this firsthand. Even the smallest pocket park became vital space for relief and recovery during that time. And then comes the third aspect, which is often overlooked and less studied overall. It's social cohesion. Parks and green spaces are the places where people from all walks of life come across, which helps build trust, safety, sense of belongingness. Psychological dimension and its benefits are very less captured, but they are immense and huge. But the reality of this greens is that neighborhood which are most vulnerable to all these issues of heat, flood, stress, they are often poorest and have the least greens. And we often are misled in our policy and planning by the high averages of the city. A city might report a good per capita green figure, but if in most of these greens, it's just one chunk of big forest or some bigger green space behind the institutional walls. So does that number really means anything to people overall? So that's why we need fine grained data, field based data. And we need to go down at a very special scale. Each city, each ward, each road. Where is the green? Who maintains it? Who can actually use it is the question. And probably this framework which I'm going to introduce can help achieve that. Now, this slide, I'll not go much in detail because Shalin ma'am already explained. In India, we have URDPFI guidelines, we have WHO standards, we also have some state level targets. But are these national norms have been maintained? Are the green still treated equally against the other infrastructure demands? I think it is deeply undervalued against other planning priorities. Even if you pick up any planning document and you'll see hardly 1 or 2 pages written about urban environment, and we will have pages about other planning priorities. So, and also governance is fragmented. Master plan often lack enforceable green targets. Now look at the data in the lower section. It's just numbers, but those numbers are telling that our tier 1 cities are way below the average. We are not looking at this yet at a spatial distribution level. The second tier better performing cities like Jaipur and Indore still fall quite short of the whatever standards mentioned by WHO. But here's a crucial point. These numbers don't even tell anything about what we discussed earlier. They exist on paper, but not in urban dwellers' lives or people's life. So now the main slide, and here we start about our introduction to the 330-300 rule. So how do we measure greenness in a city? So this framework is proposed by an urban forestry expert, Professor Cecil Conin Chendik. It is proposed as simple, powerful, and scalable rule for urban greening with a set of 3 clear targets that any city can measure, communicate, and act upon. So in the next slide, then I'll break down each of the component which are involved, which is 330 and 300. So here in 330, 300, 3 means everyone should be able to see at least 3 trees from their home, school, or workplace window. And this isn't just poetic. Visibility of green has directly been linked to mental health, mood, attention recovery. The 30% stands for each neighborhood should aim for 30% of tree canopy cover. And this could support the benefits we just highlighted: urban cooling, carbon capture, biodiversity. at block by block level and not just larger parks. And then the next component, which is 300 meters, that everyone or every individual in the city should live within the 300 meters of green space. That is about 5 to 10 minutes of walk. This ensures that greens are physically accessible, especially for the vulnerable, children, elderly, and the low income population. So together these three metrics, or we can call it component, captures visibility, coverage, and access. And it is not that this has not been done by researchers and policy makers and planners, but it has been done individually, not together. So that's why I think this framework is a good way to comprehensively look at all these three aspects together and evaluate and see where we stand in terms of urban greens provisions in our cities. So on the next slide, we see how do we actually measure the three components. Each component draws on a different data type and can be accessed, assessed using tools which are already used by us urban analyst researchers. The first is three component, which I believe is the difficult to capture because this need a very fine grained data, which in uh, our cities we do not have. So this is basically done by using street view imagery or window view analysis. Researchers use tools like Google Street View, Mapillary, sometimes combined with AI models to estimate the percentage of greenery visible from street level, and many other ways which could be seen in the papers. But a simple questionnaire can also be done to capture this aspect. For the next component, which is tree canopy cover, its vegetation indices like NDVI or more enhanced GIS-based modeling can be used, which uses satellite products like MODIS, Landsat, or Sentinel data. So, but it can also be supported by tree inventories or land cover maps, which can complement these indices to calculate how much percent of tree canopy is there in a neighborhood. And finally, 300, that is proximity to green space. This can be done by GS spatial based planning analysis, and this can be linked to urban green space maps, land use data, and network walking distance to measure whether a person who is residing in a certain area, does he have access to public park or usable green space in 300 meter or not. Now, this slide shows some methods used for 300 component. I'll not go in detail, but this is a recent study by Browning, which shows you can either use a traditional method of Euclidean distance or you can use more enhanced network-based measure, where you actually know where the park entrance is or the distance of the road, walking distance, and so on. So the point is the tools and methods for every component may vary. First one, as mentioned, it's difficult in countries like US, Netherlands, where these studies have been done. They have high resolution tree inventory data sets, street view image. They already know which trees planted where. So for them, it is very easy to capture and do the study. But in India, many of our cities doesn't even have digital inventories of tree. Not even tree, we don't even have in some places the public green space digital data. So we might have to rely on questionnaire or find ways to capture it differently. The point is, we may not have everything, but we do have enough to start. And that is why we started with the case of Nagpur study. Now, this slide shows the rule isn't just academic idea, it's beginning to shape real urban policies and planning. Cities like Zurich, Barcelona, and some cities in Canada already started to integrate this into their urban greening strategies. NGOs, planners, and even National Council recognize its value. But the problem is so far there's no standardized method for measuring or to operationalize this rule. Each city is figuring out its own way depending upon the data, resources, and the governance structure. Said that, localization is fine, but we need to keep the core of the rule. And we did same for the Nagpur case because we didn't have several data, but we tried to use this rule, keeping the core intact. And we also see some research papers on the right, which tries to show like how academia is continue to explore and test this rule, mental health benefits of tree visibility, city scale green equity, and so on. Now, the application of this rule, slide 13, we chose Nagpur to pilot this 330-300 rule. I, of course, am thankful to Shalini ma'am for introducing this rule to me, and I applied it. Nagpur is a tier 2 city. It captures many of the dynamic, which are typical in a global south city. Shalini ma'am already explained a lot about Nagpur, and so many things have already been done. The density is rising. We have uneven infrastructure, fragmented green assets. The city used to be lush green and has been considered as one of the green city. But a few of my previous studies had identified that there is a significant disparities across the city. The per capita urban green space is 3.6 meter square per person. And another major reason, of course, is we have studied Nagpur through multiple lenses over a period, from usage to urban green space quality, biodiversity, carbon sequestration potential of the green space. And this earlier efforts had laid the groundwork to take this from a more holistic perspective of applying 330 framework. Now, this gives a very grounded snapshot of Nagpur's urban green spaces, drawing on both from city's master plan and field-based mapping through GIS analysis and ground validation. We created thematic maps and identify public urban green spaces. On the right is the photo panel, which gives a snapshot of well-kept parks to vacant lots, encroached plots, riverfront walks, to polluted stormwater drains. Nagpur's green landscape is diverse but fragmented. Now the example of Nag River, which you see at the lowest one, this actually shows that green on map doesn't always translate into green in people's life, because you see that it is so polluted and inaccessible and far from usable public urban green space. Moving on to slide 15, on the left, you see the map of Nagpur's 10 administrative zones showing public urban green space availability per capita. This was a conventional metric which is used by WHO. And on the right, you see greenness level. So we use the left one to divide the city into three greenness level: high, mid, and low, specifically for the study. And based on which we then checked all the three components: 330 and 300. And how we did is this slide shows the methodology that we followed. First, a structured face-to-face questionnaire. As mentioned, we did not had very detailed data, so we followed a simple question asking people how many trees they see from their window, and we did around 500 to 600 survey. Second, we use satellite imagery to and remote sensing techniques to estimate the tree canopy cover across the city on this in this tree administrative zone, giving us a macro level view of vegetation. And third, we conducted GIS based proximity analysis to show and map household level access to public urban green spaces. We also did some statistical analysis like chi-square, ANOVA, to see how all these three components together interact and what kind of picture we get through this analysis. Now, in the following slide, I'll show some of the results of the study of each component across all the zones. What we see is the majority of respondents report seeing at least three trees, with over 70% in mid greenness and 65% in high green zones. In low green zones, the share of people who could see 3+ trees drops, and more respondent report seeing fewer than two trees, that is over 20%. The percentage of people seeing 10+ trees is highest in high greenness zone and lowest in the mid greenness zone. Next, we zoom out to the 30% canopy component, which is measured via satellite imagery, and average city-wide canopy cover is 15.9%, which is half of the 30% benchmark which we see in 330-300 rule. And high greenness zone achieved 26%, which is quite high and very good, while the low greenness areas dropped to just 7%. And this clearly indicate the disparities which we were talking earlier in the city. This illustrates a very important point that canopy cover alone doesn't guarantee access or visibility. So we need to look at where the trees are and not just how many exist, because place of the tree matters. And finally, the last component, using the Euclidean distance, very easy way to capture, we access the 300-meter rule. And the finding reveals significant disparities according to the chi-square text as well. Access is not randomly distributed, but significantly associated with the greenness classification, that is high, low, and mid. And access worsens as green declines. So 64% of respondents in high greenness zones area reported no nearby access, and it peaks to 81% in low greenness zone. Even more interesting is that some mid green zones had worse access than expected. Now, slide 20. This slide summarizes what I was mentioning is correlation. So the statistical correlationship between the three components, the heat map on the right, it shows the correlation coefficient. The value ranges between +1 and -1, where +1 means perfect positive correlation. One variable increases and so does the other one, and -1 indicates negative correlation. So one goes up, second goes down. And what we see is canopy cover and urban green spaces show a very strong negative correlation. This means that canopy cover increases, the proportion of people without access to green space significantly declines. So the greener the area, access tends to be better. For canopy cover and tree visibility, it is moderate positive correlation, which makes sense. More canopy usually means more visible tree. And tree visibility and urban green shows weak negative correlation. This suggests that even if the trees are visible from window, it is not necessarily means that you have access to those or those greens could be available in publicly accessible green spaces. Now, the key takeaway from these three component study, all the three components are related but not interchangeable. Urban green exposure is a multidimensional thing, and we need policies that account for this complexity rather than assuming greenery in one form, which automatically provide all the benefits we were discussing. It is not like that. And I think this rule, which we have just applied in the case of Nagpur city, it clearly shows that cities like Nagpur needs a tailored solution. When we were doing the study, we found that many of the data were not available. So we need to tailor the solution. We found that tree visibility, canopy cover, and access do not always align. But this doesn't mean it's a failure. It's a cue to shift from a static benchmark to integrated, people-centered greening planning. The key message for planner is uh, don't count tree, but count what they mean. So focus should also be on functionality, spatial equity, and behavior use as well. And uh, and one thing which I completely missed is the governance is completely missing layer here. Urban greenery cannot be managed in silos. Shalini ma'am already mentioned, if we want to make 330 work, we need to open planning table. We need to involve citizen, acknowledge informal greens, support neighborhood scale stewardship. And it's not about controlling green. It is about enabling it to grow and led by locals. Because the kind of cities we have, the kind of greens we have, the kind of transition we are witnessing cannot be alone managed by government. We need stewardship, we need people, we need community driven approaches. We need all the stakeholders in one place, one table, discussing about our green, our cities, and making them livable cities. And this is not a conclusion, it's a beginning. The rule gave us a structure, and our study tried to ground it, but the real impact will come from how cities and their communities carry this forward. With better tool, probably with more data, with more collaborations. And using this tool, we also have published this paper 330, 300 benchmark. If you want to look into more details, probably you could just check it out. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Shruti. Yeah, thank you, Shruti and Dr. Shalini, for actually the step-by-step walkthrough of the 330, 300 framework, and also reminding us that urban greening is not just about the metrics, but also about the people, justice, and collaboration. Now, moving on to the Q&A segment, we are hoping to extend the masterclass by 15 minutes to allow time for audience questions. So we appreciate your engagement and hope you can stay with us a little longer. Moving to the Q&A segment now. The first question is for Dr. Shalini from Rohit. He wanted to understand if there is an active biodiversity committee in Nagpur and what role do they play?
If I correctly understand this question, they want to ask if there is an active biodiversity committee for Nagpur by municipal corporation.
Yes.
So, yeah, maybe so. So if you know, the Maharashtra Biodiversity Board is based in Nagpur, but at the same time, if you look to now any municipal corporation, they have the garden department. So these garden departments are basically looking to public green parks or playgrounds, whatever is available. And this is where some kind of biodiversity is been done, but I'm not so clear that the work is largely on biodiversity because the focus is on having the tree sensors, ensuring the plantation is done right across the city, be it avenue plantation or gardens and so on and so forth. But anywhere in this, if you go, I mean, maybe the largely dominated cities are still in villages. but now there is a huge interest of in native species as well. So there is definitely garden department in Nagpur and also Maharashtra Biodiversity Board that looks and concerned about uh, biodiversity in urban areas too, but not largely focused on biodiversity related initiatives. Yeah, that's one part of it, but not largely the whole of it.
Sure. Thank you for answering that. Moving on to the next question. Given that the baseline data collection in Indian cities is primarily sourced from government reports, is there a strategic plan to monetize this data through carbon credits? And with the private sector accelerating its push towards net zero, could this data-driven approach support sustainable investments, particularly focusing on water conservation and biodiversity restoration? So, Dr. Shalini, if you want to take this up.
Yeah. Thank you, Shaurya. I think when you talk about baseline data, and even if you look for natural forest areas or urban areas, I think most of the baseline that we try to collect is from more sources that are research-based sources. So publications. I mean, when we did it for Faridabad and Nagpur, our effort was more data-driven and trying to see if we can collect a lot of primary data. But again, for baseline data, the relevance and our focus was collecting from sources that are more where you get the more research bent to it. So, for example, the Nagpur University is there, and we had some of the good professors who have done some of the good work in last 30 years. So, for us, looking to biodiversity related data, we look to these 30 years of information. So that was one. And then, iBird data and all that citizen science collected data is also some kind of authentic data at certain level. So even seeing to that data can also give you some understanding on where the baselines are. But largely, if you see government line department data is not that new data because no, it's not updated as fast as how researchers are updating their data. I have try to look to the data that is available with government, but I think I have really focused on the data that is coming from universities and organizations to get a better picture of the city. Uh, and then I think the next part of the question is, yes, of course. But again, I think these data sets can be used as baselines. But again, priority, I think I'll give to more research-oriented data that has come up. Again, the same concern. If the data is not upgraded and updated at a regular basis, the data is not very relevant for these kind of studies. Shaurya, there was another part of this question regarding private sector. Can you please repeat that part?
Sure. So with the private sector accelerating its push towards net zero, could this data approach support sustainable investments in focusing on water conservation and biodiversity restoration?
I think there is a lot going already on for this net zero carbon credits and all of those things. I think this definitely has the interest not only by private sector but also by government line departments. And I think these kind of models they are themselves trying to develop. For example, in Delhi, a few years back, they were trying to have carbon credits from urban parks. And also, I mean, Shruti has done a lot of carbon studies, carbon stock assessment for public green access. We have also done for some of the parks and playgrounds and also campuses in Nagpur. And there are a lot many researchers who are doing that. So good thing can be to show what kind of carbon stocks are existing. And even in the census data that is developed by Nagpur Municipal Corporation, they're really keen to actually convert this census data into carbon stocks. Now with multiple technologies and researchers getting involved, I think it's not very complicated. But how do we see this further will be again a question on government, how much they are considering this. And with another one, Yojana by Government of India, where they want 100 urban forests to be developed across the country. I think this has definitely a value, but how much it will be, I think that will be the further policies or strategies developed by government that will give a better light to that and better understanding of that. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you for your
questions.
Yes, I hope. Um, Moving on to the next question, I think this is for Shruti. Given that land is at a premium and indicates inequality, are there ways to unpack access to urban green spaces that are not tree focused?
Sorry. So you mean that how do we handle spatial equity and access to greens where it is not available?
Yes, and yeah, that
Okay.
summarizes it.
Okay. So to do that, first of all, we need data. That is what the topic is. Planners and policymakers can only um, respond to this. Of course, I know this equity issue is not just in India, it's everywhere. It's in New York, other ways, in other countries and other cities as well. But the point is, when we have data enough to understand our city, then probably we can talk about it. And that is why first we need to have and sit on a table and see city as a green, and then we need to work out on those aspects of equity and other. First of all, it is not a priority. And then second, to answer that, first we need data and we need more awareness and people's involvement in addressing those and asking for what they need for the city.
I think, yeah, the question then looks into if there are ways that are not tree focused actually for urban green spaces.
I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Pre-focused in the sense?
Like the current framework focuses on the 333 framework, focuses on tree access. So are there other
Mhm.
ways that unpack access to urban green spaces that do not focus specifically on trees?
So far we have been looking at urban green space in just terms of provision, in terms of per capita or how much urban forest we have protecting those. But we have never looked at spatial access or where it is where the greens are. And that is why that is what this framework is trying to capture.
So I'm hoping, Natasha, we got your question correct. Um, Moving on to the next question. Green space projects often seem to be neglected due to lack of commercial viability. So based on your experience and learnings, can you share your views on how can this challenge be addressed?
About
For
sorry.
So green space projects often seem to be neglected because based of commercial viability, and you also shared that the government funding won't be enough for growing their expanse. Therefore, based on your experience and learnings, can you share your views on how can this challenge be addressed? And also, what role can budding policy professionals and action tanks play in the same?
So until now, we have been looking at urban green spaces from just one perspective. But when policy planners and everybody look at these green spaces from a different perspective, like NbS, green spaces have been looked at as a decorative aspect for recreation purpose. But when we look at different aspects of how it helps in stormwater management or heat island effect, and how it helps in getting carbon credits for a city or addressing other challenges, then probably, and we monetize that. So it's not just we are thinking of this from a recreation perspective, but other benefit and monetize that. If, for example, in Nagpur we have greeny, how much temperature it reduces in the surrounding area and how it reduces the energy load overall in that area. If we can monetize that, if we can put up in paper and show studies, then probably we are not going to have these issues of funding and then saying that it is not a very justifiable proposition to have a such big green space in the center of the city or in areas where we do not have land. So I think we need to change our perspective and put up all the different benefits we have been talking about, which have not been even captured till now. So for example, if we are talking about this 330 framework from a policy perspective, but what if we see it from a different perspective and see that all the three parameters are fulfilled and try to develop scenarios for future. So if we have this 30% canopy cover 300 captured, and how, and we develop scenarios, if the city is now having this and if we project and fulfill all the criteria, how does it help in mitigating everything which we discussed? Stormwater drainage, heat island, cooling the air, and how it can help in monetizing these benefits. If we know these kind of studies, then probably we can help understand everybody that these green environment have certain other benefits. but it has to be monetized. There needs to be frameworks, there needs to be study and monitoring for that. So that is my take on it. It's a long process, just I mentioned earlier that first of all, we do not understand. We cannot capture everything. So we need frameworks to capture that. We need to monetize and put green spaces on the table where all their benefits are realized together. And it's just the beginning with NbS solutions. We know that. Now, Shalini ma'am talked about biodiversity. We are not even talking about that now.
Thank you for that
Sorry.
thoughtful response, Shruti. Moving on to the next question. This is about the data sets. If data sets such as subsurface infrastructure, hydrogeology, water supply are also taken into account for the baselines assessment.
I think, yes, they are taken. If you see one of the reports that we have, I hope this question was for me. I just instantly went into answering.
Yeah.
So the report that I mentioned, state of environment for Nagpur for last 10 years, the report that is being published. So it is definitely taking care of subsurface flow, the air environment, the wastewater environment, the climate change concerns, forest at city level, and how to develop resilience, and also damage cost assessment. If we don't do kind of development that is actually hampering if we do the development, it actually hampers the environment, how much of damage it is causing in terms, I mean, putting a monetary value to it. So definitely what Shruti said, if we conserve it in a better way, how much value we can create. So in this way, see, definitely we are using those baseline information also. And based on that, we are also doing scenario projections for Nagpur.
Sure, thank you for answering that. I think we'll take up one last question. This is focusing on proposing or suggesting a roadmap for urban green spaces in real estate development. Also, another question focuses on applying the 330-300 framework for educational campuses. So if you want to take those up as well. Either of you can answer.
So can I go first regarding the real estate?
Sure.
So I think a few years back, almost in 2018 or something, and a little earlier than that, when we started looking to these real estate concerns of urban areas, and these are the same questions that we are also chasing. Because when we talk about all these standards, that they are basically for when the cities are expanding horizontally. And a lot of cities are no more developing horizontally. Now they are developing vertically. So a lot of high rises are coming. And this is an important concern for how do we ensure that these kind of standards are met and green planning is appropriately integrated. Now, one of the things that we mentioned in all these years has been that the way we do compensatory afforestation, or how when we do impact assessment for forest area, whenever we divert a area for a non-forested purpose, at least times plantation is done. And the area should have at least 30% of greenery. Wherever this development, industrial development happens, it should have at least 13%, 30% of greenery in the premises. But when we talk about real estate, why are we not talking about it? Why are we not asking about it? And why we are not implementing it? So whenever you go for these kind of real estate development, I think the only thing that they will show you is planting some palms, these palms on the avenues to make it green. But I think because there is definitely there is a demand, everybody wants a good ambience around them. But I think it comes from the concern if you have already lived in an area where such green spaces are, you can only understand the value if you live in certain areas. So if you have always lived in an area where there was no green space and there was always concretization, you cannot assume and imagine what kind of benefit it brings in. But I think gradually it is changing, and I think good thing can be for real estate developers that they ensure at least 30% of greenery in wherever this development is happening. If they're developing horizontally, fine, develop it through plantation. If you're not developing horizontally, see the ways and approaches, and there are 100 ways to do that. There are a lot of good urban planners who can help you with that. There are a lot of implementers and practitioners who can help you which kind of trees you can have which and how to plant them. So if you are having vertical expansion, see what can be the ways, greening the balconies, indoor greening the roof. So there are n number of ways. but there should be a proper criteria, and there should be a proper enforcement of at least 30% as a greening criteria for all these expansions that are happening. So I think this is what that can help. And what was the second question, Shaurya? This was regarding 330, 300.
The second one was focusing on educational campuses.
Yeah, I think that can also be a good idea, because when we started doing 330, 300, it was last year for State of Environment report. So before doing the publication, we did 330, 300, started for State of Environment report of Nagpur, and we focused on our campus as well. So CSR Niri is a 48 hectare of green campus right in the heart of the city. And it also helps us reduce the urban, our campus is almost 3 degrees cooler, and we have very shallow aquifers. Our groundwater is very shallow at the same time. So these are some of the benefits, and there's a huge lot of opportunity. We can start from our neighborhood, we can start from our campuses, and that can be a good approach to see where do we stand with this very implementable and workable strategy of accessing your green spaces in your neighborhood, in your campuses, and where not. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Dr.
agree.
Shalini. Yeah.
I agree with Shalini ma'am on this point and the question raised about institutional greens. And I think in a city like Nagpur also, NIRI is a very important green institutions which is in the heart of the city and which actually impact overall environment of the city. Plus, there is VNIT institutional campus, there is medical area, and all these greens, although they are needy, cannot be accessible, but there are other educational institutions which are allowed for people to walk into and go in the morning and evening walks. So I think that's a good approach. If we start using this framework or applying this framework, at least for educational institution, it would be a good starting point. And again, one point about this is just a quantity. Now, next part comes the quality. What species we are planting, what kind of biodiversity it supports. So those are other things. The framework are just to quantitatively measure where we stand, and then we need to further dig into about the quality of spaces we are preparing and the quality of experiences we are giving to people and matching the demand or not. In terms of all the aspects, not just biodiversity, but also social cohesion and equity and other aspects. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Shruti and Dr. Shalini, for your valuable time, given that you are in different time zones, and also for sharing your work and insights with us today. And thank you to all our participants for being a part of this session. We hope the discussion has inspired some new thinking. And please look. And for this masterclass, before we end, we just wanted to have a quick feedback through an interactive Mentimeter poll. This will help us better plan our upcoming masterclasses. Please scan the QR code. I'll also drop the link in the chat. Thank you once again for your time today. As mentioned earlier, the recording of today's session will be shared with you via email. We look forward to seeing you again for the next masterclass. Until then, take care and have a great evening. And thank you to our speakers again.